How has it been the last year plus during the pandemic as the hate crimes against Asian Americans in the United States go up? How has it been as a reporter covering a lot of those crimes? And of course, none more violent than the shooting last week in Atlanta, but uh, also as a human,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
an Asian American man, like forget that you're a reporter.
yeah. It's it's been eh, emotionally, it's been at times exhausting. But I think um, eh, as a journalist, I think I realize that even though it is exhausting, there are stories out there that really need to be told, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand with what I was saying about how there needs to be more Asian American representation in journalism and in news media, because it is a lot for one person or two people in an organization to sort of shoulder the burden of telling, not burden, but shoulder the weight of telling all of those stories. Because if you think about it, within the Asian American community, it is diverse in itself. And so um, I understand the context and the nuance of like our culture overall, but within the Asian American community, there's still a lot of different ethnicities, different languages spoken. And so over the last year, I mean, even talking with other Asian American journalist friends that I have, who I'm really close to, my friends who are in the Asian American Journalist Association, there are things that we sort of have to connect on our own time to sort of just talk through, whether it's moral support or asking each other like, hey, how did you navigate certain situations? I do consider myself fortunate in that I work in a newsroom where I think my management have been very supportive, and they check in with me fairly often just to see how I'm doing, if there are resources that I need. And I am very, very grateful and lucky in that regard. But unfortunately, not every Asian American journalist has that sort of backing. So
And you talk about the Asian American culture. It's not one to really put forward the idea of mental health, the idea of self care. How do you make sure that you take care of yourself?
yeah, that's it's good that you bring that up, because I that is another part of me being a big advocate for Asian Americans in media, is that I'm fairly open about the fact that a couple years ago I decided seeing a therapist was really important for me, especially being in this job and growing up growing up in Asian American communities. We don't necessarily um, address mental health. And so it was really important for me to sort of come to the realization that that could be beneficial for me. So I started seeing a therapist, and it was really important for me to see a therapist who understood sort of the cultural background that I came from. And so, um, I encouraged, many of my Asian American colleagues and my peers, even outside of journalism, that if you feel that you need sort of this mental and emotional support, like seek therapy, and it's paid off for me in a big way. And so that's a conversation that I'm open to having with anyone who's in the AAPI community who has thought about it. Yeah.
What was the conversation like with your family as you go to a therapist? And did you tell them? And how was that conversation?
Yeah, well, I'm very fortunate in that, like, I think my siblings are very understanding of that. And so when I talked to them, I mean, they were more than supportive. I think my parents were a little bit more, they had more questions, but I think they understand that in my line of work, I've seen fairly traumatic things that sometimes, I think sometimes being a journalist, we encounter these things, and we, after you cover the story, you kind of move on, and you don't really think about it. So I think once I started going to therapy, I sort of realized that there were things that I needed to talk through. And I think once I kind of made that connection for my parents, I think they were a lot more. They came to the realization that it was actually very healthy for me. So, I'm I just turned 30 in November, and I've covered multiple mass shootings. I've talked to families of victims of very like horrible crimes. And it's early on in my career, I always told myself that if I get to a point where I can be emotionally disconnected from things like this, then I think it's just kind of time for me to leave the business. And when I started approaching uh stories where I can walk away from it and not sort of have this emotional, this human conscious to like connect with it, that's when I was like, I think I need to see a therapist. And I did, and I think it's really helped. So